but just to recognise that there are certain things, certain areas of life, and politics is one, maybe the arts is another, where things don't come easily, and you can easily miss out, and you've just got to wait your time.
I'm Leah, the founder of Broadstairs Consulting. We're a board advisory and mediation practice helping people thrive and flourish in crisis situations. Believing crisis isn't an if, it's a when. We want to help people disagree well and move forwards in challenging times. While we are unafraid of crisis, it's rare for one to be resolved in a single day. However long the day or night that gave rise to the crisis in the first place, there's always something we can learn. That's the genesis of the longest day. Our guests have overcome a litany of crises. Many have worked with us in some capacity in the past. All of them have stories worth hearing. We trust them to make this worth your while. We hope it helps you trust us. This week's podcast guest hardly needs an introduction. The Right Honourable Sir Vince Cable was Secretary of State for Business Innovation and Skills and President of the Board of Trade from 2010 to 2015. He was the Member of Parliament for Twickenham between 1997 and 2015, Deputy Leader of the Lib Dems 2007 to 2010, and Shadow Chancellor from 2003 to 2010. He was the Leader of the Liberal Democrats from 2017 to 2019. Vince Cable read Natural Sciences and Economics at Cambridge University, where he was President of the Union, followed by undertaking a PhD at Glasgow University. Vince is currently a visiting professor at various universities, and author of several books, non-executive director of various companies, and was recently made Freeman of the City of London. Well, Sir Vince, thank you for being willing to join us on the longest day. Perhaps you might like to tell our listeners about your longest day.
Well, there are quite a few candidates, but I think the one I would pick out was the day in 2015 in May when I lost my seat in Parliament before I retrieved it a couple of years later. And I'd been in the cabinet for 5 years. I'd been the local MP for almost 20 years, very settled with a big majority. And then, more or less overnight, that position was wiped out, and I was defeated, and I was out in my 70s, having been rejected by the local population. So it was a pretty grim situation.
And how did you get through that situation? I mean, obviously, it's not something that could be resolved overnight. So what did you do in that situation?
Well, I think it was partly that some of the people around me made it easier for me because I knew that there were people who cared, and I had a very tough but effective election agent, now in the House of Lords, who's a sort of lifelong friend who cushioned the whole thing. I had my 3 grown-up children around me and my wife. So I had that kind of cushioning, personal. My opponent in Twickenham, Tanya Matthias, was very gracious. I don't think she'd expected to win, and was very kind to me and publicly generous. So all of those things made it a little less traumatic than it could have been. But I think the key turning point was having not slept all night. I went back to my wife's little farm in the New Forest, and we went out in the sun on, it was a May morning, and sat down and, thought about life and realized there were a lot of, positive things that we both wanted to do. And suddenly, the world looked a lot better. We had a plan for the future. We had something to build on. The world didn't look quite so awful. And the fact that so many of my colleagues had gone down with me meant there was a kind of certain amount of solidarity in defeat. So all of those things made it easier. And so I think by the lunch of the day after the election, I'd sort of turned a corner.
What was it that you learned about yourself after reflecting on going through that election process?
Well, I think the first is that I'd been rather complacent and perhaps a bit conceited. I'd sort of imagined that I was very secure here and everybody loved me, and then realised rather that actually, when it came to the crunch, they were voting for the next government, not for me, and I couldn't rely on it. So I deceived myself as to the strength of my own position. So it was a humbling in that sense. And then actually I'd spent the previous 3 weeks charging around the country helping my friends when I should have been shoring up my position here. So I think the first thing was realizing that I'd been complacent and perhaps a bit arrogant in assuming that I was as strong as I was. So that was the first big lesson. And the second was the importance of family and friends. The worst position to be, I think, if you're exposed like that, is not to have anybody to fall back on. But if you do have people to fall back on, that makes things bearable. And I think the third thing is which we realised when we were thinking about the future, is having a positive, optimistic view about life. There are things you want to do. They could be public spirited, they could be selfish, they could just enjoying life. But there are lots of good things in the world, and it doesn't require a great deal of imagination to have a forward plan that's good.
Politics is inherently mission driven. And one's desire to get elected is usually accompanied by a desire to impact society or bring about change. What do you think the impact of failing to get elected was on your later leadership when you were subsequently re-elected?
Well, I would question how much of politics is mission-driven. A lot of it's, of course, ego-driven by the people involved. No, I think the fact that I had lost and then unexpectedly won again and found myself as a party leader, you have that immense sense of relief that you've been reprieved and vindicated. And so you're then quite much more relaxed and confident about the next step in life, which may well be very difficult. But having gone through that experience and emerged from it makes you a lot stronger than you were before.
Are you feeling stuck? Has conflict got you down? Have you considered mediation? Mediation is a confidential and flexible way to resolve conflicts. 86% of all mediations end in a solution, saving time, money, and stress for all involved. Thanet Mediation Centre, a Broadstairs consulting initiative, offers mediation services to individuals and organisations in Thanet, Kent, and further afield. For more information or advice, email us at info@broadstairsconsulting.com. We are here to help you move forwards.
What advice would you give to somebody who has repeatedly stood for a position in Parliament and been unsuccessful?
Well, in my case, I got in at the fifth attempt 30 years after I first tried. So I think I'm an extreme illustration of the progression you described. I think in general, I would recommend patience and persistence and not giving up. But I wouldn't want... there are far too many people in politics and public life generally who have kind of wrecked their families or messed themselves up personally by not accepting reality. So I think you have to, first of all, start by recognize that politics, or maybe another public role, is important but not transcendent. There are other things that are more important, and having your nearest and dearest around you, your family or friends, they're the people who really matter. So you've got to get that sorted, be clear about that first. But if you have, then, keep trying, providing it's realistic. I mean, I think there is a point in all careers, where you have to be hard-headed and take the view, well, look, this isn't going anywhere. I've got to try something else. And having the realism and courage to do that.
In addition to having the right people around you, how have you cultivated that patience?
Well, again, I think it's been helped by, well, in case my first wife, who, was always willing to keep me going, because it's so easy to say, okay, this is just too much trouble, I'll go off and do something else. So you do need that kind of reinforcement of what you're trying to do. I don't think it's something you can think through, actually. I think in my case, I was particularly ambitious or particularly determined, a sort of character trait that I've cultivated and developed. So I don't think it's something you can wish, but just to recognise that there are certain things, certain areas of life, and politics is one, maybe the arts is another, where things don't come easily, and you can easily miss out, and you've just got to wait your time.
What would you say to the leader who is primarily ego-driven and trying to succeed?
Well, I think they're going to come to grief at some point. I mean, unless they've got some anchoring in what it is they're trying to achieve, they're ultimately going to fail. Because even though, all of us are ego-driven to some extent. I mean, it's politics. It's performative. You get a kick out of speaking to an audience, chairing a committee, or whatever it happens to be. You're number one in the room. We all have that drug somewhere that's keeping us going. But if that's all there is, then you're completely ruthless. And so I think if people find themselves in that position, they've just got to sit themselves down and just ask, what am I doing this for? Is it? And their friends have got to tell them, that if they're just doing it for themselves and their ego, then they're in the wrong business. And of course you have the pathological extremes like Trump, who exactly what happens if you get an ego-driven personality emerging on top. And we're not at Johnson's, probably another, very narcissistic, no obvious belief system, and it in both cases do terrible damage.
And if I might be so bold, what would you say your anchor is?
Well, again, it sounds a bit sentimental, but I've been fortunate in having two lovely women, one my late wife and my new wife, and I've been, for a lot of people make bad choices. I made good choices. I was lucky. And so I suppose at the end of the day, they are actually the anchor. My children too, but perhaps in a more distant way.
So, final question from me. If you had to live your longest day again, what food would you choose to help you get through it?
Well, I think bananas are my staple diet, actually. There was a period when I was a student and I travelled around India on my own. And I was rather worried about going down with dysentery and all these things that people get. And so I lived off bananas and masala tea. That was my diet for about a month or something. And I survived without anything happening. And ever since then, I always have a banana at breakfast. Even when I'm going out to the gym, I have, a banana. So that, but if I'm allowed a bit more time to have a good meal, I think I would choose a good South Indian vegetarian masala dosa or something. That's my sort of favourite food.
I love that, and not at all what I was expecting from a Yorkshireman.
Right. Well, no, I fish and chips and Yorkshire pudding. Yeah, I can do with that. But
well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and thank you for being so candid. And it's been a real joy to have you on The Longest Day.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a Broadstairs Consulting Limited podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Tune in soon to hear the next instalment of The Longest Day. Copyright 2023. Production copyright Broadstairs Consulting Limited. All rights reserved.